This video is brought to you by Red Digital Cinema, AV8 Media, and EIZO. Lenses sponsored by Zeiss, and lighting sponsored by Aputure. Hi there, I'm Yin, and today we're going to discuss how to set up DaVinci Resolve for HDR grading using the PQ curve, also known as SMPTE ST2084. Now before we get into any of that, let's ask a more basic question. Why do we need high dynamic range or HDR deliverables in the first place? To demonstrate that, I'm going to go ahead and show you the limitations of standard dynamic range within DaVinci Resolve. Now this is what Resolve Color Management has given me for my Rec. 709 image. So I actually quite like the look of the mid-tones. The problem is this, I really don't like the fact that I've lost my highlight information here. I know the information is there, and if I gain down, I like the fact that I've got this highlight information here, but now the mid-tones are very crushed. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to grade for a compromise between the two. I'm going to compress my highlights, going to bring my highlights up with my gain just before they clip. I'm going to lift my gamma up so that the walls look okay. And I'm going to bring my lift down so that the shadows look a bit more crunchy. So that gives me an image where I've got the midtones to where I want them to be and the highlights unblown. But you can see that the highlights are very, very compressed and not very well defined. So what's going on here? So broadcast standards like Rec. 709 and SDR Rec. 2020 are pegged to 100 nits of brightness. To simplify, even though DaVinci Resolve can't show it, just imagine that 0 here represents 0 nits, and over at the top here, 1, 2, 3 represents 100 nits of brightness. Okay? Now anything above 100 nits is clipped, you can't see it. Now this 100 nit range limits us to a dynamic range of about 6 to 7 stops. Now this is very strange considering the fact that we have cameras like the Red Gemini, which can capture 16.5 stops of dynamic range, and the Red Monstro can go beyond 17 stops. So what happens to this 10-stop discrepancy between the camera and the display? Whether consciously or unconsciously, what colorists have been doing for years is creatively squeezing large volumes of light into a much smaller space, which is what I just did by compressing the highlights. Now, what I would love to do with this image ideally is I would like to take this highlight here and put it above 100 nits so that this hotspot here really looks like it's brighter than the rest of the cave. But I can't because there's nothing above 100 nits. But in high dynamic range deliverables, there is. The process I'm going to show you today focuses on delivering for HDR10. And in order to color grade in HDR, I need a HDR monitor. And today I'm using the EIZO ColorEdge PROMINENCE CG3145 HDR reference monitor. It's got 24-bit LUTs, it's got a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio, which means it can express really bright whites and very deep blacks. But what you really need to know today is that this monitor can achieve 1,000 nits of brightness, and it has modes for HDR grading built in. I'm going to turn on one of them right now. I'm going to switch to PQ Rec. 2100 setting in the monitor. The first thing you notice, of course, is that the saturation just took a massive boost and the overall brightness increased, but it looks wrong. The reason why it looks wrong is because we've not set up DaVinci Resolve to grade in HDR. Let's do that right now. I'm going to go to DaVinci Resolve, Preferences, and I'm going to click on User and then Color. I'm going to enable this function that's only available in the studio version that says Enable HDR Scopes for ST2084. Now, what PQ essentially does is that it scales the 10 or 12-bit values of your image to fit 10,000 nits of brightness. So you can see now that this scope reflects 0 nits, 1 nit, 10 nits, 100 nits, which is where our SDR usually ends, but it then allows us to go beyond to 1,000 nits, and one day when display technologies finally allow it, we can hit 10,000 nits. Next, I'm going to go to my project settings, I'm going to enter color management again, and I'm going to change my output color space to Rec. 2100 ST2084. ST2084 is basically the PQ curve, so it matches what the monitor is showing right now. I'm going to save, and you'll notice straight away that the image makes a lot more sense. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up to about 1000 nits right now, and I'm just going to bring my gamma up in order to compensate for the walls. But as I do, you're going to realize the highlights and shadows are starting to contract and expand on the waveform monitor. The reasons for this is very simple. If I go to my project settings and color management, the timeline color space is currently set to SDR. So theoretically, I should change this to Rec 2100 ST204 as well. But I'm not going to, because if I had graded this timeline for SDR before this, changing this setting now would totally mess up my grade, and I don't want to do that. And instead, I'm going to right click on my node, and I'm going to turn on this mode that says HDR Mode. Then I'm going to bring up my gain, again to about 1000 nits just before the rocks clip. And I'm going to bring up my gamma, and now you can see the gamma behaves properly. Okay? And finally, I'm going to bring down my lift just to make the blacks a lot more crunchy. And so you notice now that in this HDR grade, I've got proper shadows, I've got mid-tone contrast I'm happy with, I've also got my mist over here at 100 nits, which is actually where SDR white is, but I can go above that and put my hotspot here at 1000 nits, which is something I cannot do without HDR. If you compare my SDR grade to my HDR grade, it's very obvious that the HDR grade is superior, and it makes better use of the range of values available in the original Redcode RAW file. I'm going to show you just one more shot so you can compare the differences again between SDR and HDR. This is what the shot looks like in SDR, and this is what the shot looks like in HDR. And if you own a HDR TV or a smartphone that supports HDR, you can see these differences even more clearly because this very video you're watching was graded for HDR. Thank you so much for your time. We hope you've enjoyed this step-by-step introduction to color grading HDR in DaVinci Resolve. For more information, you can check out the links below. If you'd like to find out more about Red, or if you like to download some sample files like the ones I was using for this demo, there's a link for that. If you'd like to get more HDR training, AV8 Media offers courses for that go way beyond the scope of what we've covered today. So do check out the courses below. And if you want to find out more about this gorgeous EIZO CG3145 HDR reference monitor, there is a link for that as well. Thank you so much for your time, and do let us know if there's any other topics you'd like us to cover by leaving a comment below. Thank you so much.